Welcome to another deep dive. You know, you guys really threw us for a loop this time.
Yeah.
With this one, Das how do you even...
Das nationale System der politischen Ökonomie.
Oh, man. You're good. See, I told you folks we got a ringer over here.
You practice it like 5 times, you're good.
Well, I'm glad somebody did, because this book is from 1841.
That's right.
And honestly, it's still causing a stir today.
Yeah?
Because it really gets into how nations build wealth and power.
Mm-hmm.
And Friedrich List, the guy who wrote it, he had some pretty strong opinions about free trade.
Yeah, you could say that strong opinions.
Strong opinions, yeah.
List really went after the big names of his time.
Yeah.
Adam Smith's, the Jean-Baptiste, as the guys who were really pushing for free trade everywhere.
A free trade crowd.
Yeah, he called their whole approach cosmopolitan economics.
Cosmopolitan economics.
Because basically they were saying national borders didn't really matter when it came to economics.
Right.
And List thought that was leaving developing nations in a really tough spot.
Okay. So paint a picture for us here.
Okay.
It's the 1800s. Industrial Revolution is in full swing.
Yeah.
England's the big dog on the block.
The factories are humming.
Factories are churning out goods.
Yeah.
And they're pushing for free trade all over the world. But List is like, hold on a second.
Yeah, he's like, pump the brakes.
Pump the brakes. What was he so worried about?
He saw that countries trying to get their economies going, just starting out, they couldn't compete with England's industries.
Right. They were already so established.
Exactly. It'd be like a middle school basketball team trying to play against the NBA.
Yeah, that's not a fair fight.
Not even close. List said those new industries, the infant industries, as he called them, they'd get crushed before they even had a chance to grow.
Yeah, without some kind of protection.
Some kind of edge.
Right. So it's like you got to let the little guy build up some muscle before you throw him in the ring with the heavy hitter. Okay, I'm starting to get it. But how did List think countries should actually do this? Did he just want everyone to, close their borders and shut themselves off from the rest of the world?
He wasn't saying shut everything down, but he was all about being strategic.
Strategic, okay.
He believed countries needed to build up what he called their productive powers before they could really compete on a global scale.
Productive powers. That sounds kind of vague.
Yeah.
What are we talking about here?
It's a big idea for List, and it goes way beyond just factories and raw materials.
Okay.
He's talking about a nation's skills, education system, infrastructure, basically everything that makes it capable of growing and innovating.
So it's like the whole package.
The whole package, yeah. Gotta have a solid foundation.
So if you're constantly just trying to catch up, importing everything, you're never going to develop your own technology, your own talent, your own way of doing things.
You become dependent and you never really catch up. List was really big on history.
Yeah.
He used a lot of historical examples to make his point.
Well, that's what we're doing.
Exactly. That's what this whole deep dive is about.
So he pointed to places like the Hanseatic League.
Okay, I've heard of them.
These powerful merchant guilds in the Middle Ages.
Okay. Yeah.
All about trade. They were
big time.
But they didn't focus on building up their own production.
Oh.
And guess what happened?
What?
They went into decline.
So they basically traded themselves out of existence.
Kind of, yeah. Too much focus on buying and selling, not enough on making and creating.
Ouch. Any other examples that really nail this point home?
Oh, yeah. List had a whole bunch. He looked at Finniss. Early economic powerhouse, right?
Yeah.
But List argued their early success was actually because of protectionist policies.
Get out of here.
Yeah, they protected their own industries early on, helped them get strong.
Okay.
But then what did they do? They shifted towards free trade.
Oh.
And guess what happened?
Tell me they didn't go the way of the Hanseatic League.
They kind of did.
Down the tubes.
List used them as a cautionary tale, a warning.
Yeah, he was saying, look, you need to build a solid foundation before you just open the floodgates to free trade.
So no free trade Wild West until you've got your act together.
Exactly.
Okay, I got it. But what about England? They were like the kings of free trade back then.
Right.
Didn't that completely contradict List's whole argument?
That's where it gets interesting. List was a sharp guy.
Yeah.
He saw right through England's game. He said they were only pushing for free trade after they had used protectionist policies to build up their own industries.
So they built up their empire on protectionism, and then they were like, hey, everybody, free trade is the best.
Pretty much. They wanted everyone else to play by their rules after they had already gotten ahead.
Talk about sneaky.
Yeah, List called them out. He pointed to the Navigation Acts.
I vaguely remember those from history class.
There were laws that forced England's colonies to only trade with England,
Oh, wow.
using English ships. It was a way for them to control the seas and all the resources.
Yeah, that's a major power play.
Big time. So England wasn't exactly the poster child for pure free trade.
Not by a long shot. And how did List use Portugal as an example?
Portugal got played. They signed this treaty with England, the Methuen Treaty,
Okay.
and it basically favored English textiles. What happened with Portugal's own textile industry got decimated.
Wow, classic case of one country getting the short end of the stick.
Yeah, and that's exactly what List was warning against.
So free trade can actually make some countries less free.
He would say that.
If it means becoming dependent on another country for all your essential stuff,
You got it.
you're at their mercy.
He hammered on this idea of economic independence.
Makes sense.
He didn't want countries to be puppets of more powerful nations.
You want them to stand on their own 2 feet.
Exactly.
I know List spent a lot of time in the United States.
He did.
What did he think about how things were going here?
He was a big fan of how the early U.S. used protectionist policies
Really?
to build up its industries and become independent from Europe.
So he saw it as like proof of concept?
Yeah, he was like, see, I told you this works.
Okay, so he's using all these historical examples
Mm-hmm.
to make the case for this national system where countries prioritize their own development first.
Right.
But was this all about just like piling up wealth for List?
That's where things get a little more philosophical. Remember those productive powers we talked about?
Uh-huh.
List went beyond just the purely economic stuff.
Oh, okay.
He said a nation's true wealth wasn't just about money, but also education, technological innovation, even culture and institutions.
It's not just about being rich. It's about building a society that could do great things.
You got it. List believed that developing those productive powers, that was the key to long-term national strength and prosperity.
He was thinking long game.
Very long game.
Yeah.
He said a nation with strong productive powers, it could not only compete economically, but also defend itself, preserve its culture, really thrive in the world.
So it's about more than just survival. It's about flourishing.
Exactly. And that's where we really start to see the depth of List's thinking.
Okay, so there's a lot more to his ideas than just protectionism, good free trade, bad.
Way more.
It's about understanding history power dynamics and this whole idea of building a nation's capabilities.
He was really flipping the script on how people thought about economic development.
He was ahead of his time.
And we're just getting started.
There's more.
List goes even deeper. He explores how manufacturing actually helps agriculture and how land values play into the whole equation.
Wait, manufacturing helps agriculture?
Yeah.
That sounds kind of counterintuitive. How does that work?
That's what we're going to dive into next.
All right, stay tuned, folks, because we're about to get into the really mind-bending stuff.
So you ready for this? List said that a busy factory town down the road actually makes the farmland around it more valuable.
Okay, I got to hear this. You'd think factories would mean less land for farming, maybe even some pollution.
That's what a lot of people thought back then. But List pointed out that factories create jobs.
Okay, sure.
And those factory workers need to eat.
Makes-
Suddenly, you've got this bigger local market for all those farm goods. Plus, factory jobs mean people have more money.
Right.
So farmers can charge higher prices for their products.
It's like a ripple effect. The whole economy gets a boost, even the parts that seem far away from the factory.
That's it. Everything's connected. List used England as the perfect example.
Okay, England again.
As their manufacturing took off, the value of their farmland skyrocketed.
Interesting. So it's not just about producing more stuff. It's about creating this whole system
Yeah, a whole ecosystem.
where different parts of the economy are supporting each other.
Exactly. List saw that the school, those classical economists he was criticizing, they often missed these connections.
So they were missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, they were so focused on individuals making rational choices in the market.
Right, the invisible hand and all that.
Yeah, they kind of forgot about the bigger picture, how national economies really work.
So how did List think nations should actually manage their economies? Did he want the government calling all the shots?
He wasn't a laissez-faire kind of guy, that's for sure.
Hands off.
Yeah, but he didn't want the government running everything either. He believed in a balanced approach.
The middle way.
Yeah, he said the government has a big role to play in guiding development.
Not just sitting back and letting the market do its thing.
Exactly.
So what kind of role for the government? Did he talk about things like investing in education or infrastructure?
All of that. List was big on government investment in education, transportation, even scientific research.
So he's talking about building the foundation for long-term growth.
Exactly. Not just chasing quick profits, but investing in things that pay off over time.
The long game again.
List was all about the long game.
Okay, so how about trade? Did List have any thoughts on how that should work?
Oh yeah, he had some strong opinions on that. He hated it when countries signed trade deals that only helped the stronger nation.
So he was against lopsided deals.
Totally. He said countries needed to be smart about trade. Make sure it helps build up their own industries, not just make other countries richer.
That sounds pretty relevant today with all the talk about trade wars and globalization.
And it's super relevant. List's ideas are making a comeback. People are realizing that free trade isn't always this win-win situation.
Right, there can be winners and losers.
Exactly. And List wanted to protect those who were at risk of losing out, especially developing countries.
So he wanted to give countries more control over their own economic destiny.
You got it. He saw his national system as a way for countries to take charge of their future, be proactive, not just react to the global market.
So how did all of this fit into the bigger picture for List? Did he think that focusing on national interests would inevitably lead to conflict between countries?
That's interesting because he actually had a pretty optimistic view of the future.
Really?
Yeah, List believed that once all nations developed their productive powers and reached a similar level of economic maturity, then they would naturally move towards free trade and cooperation.
So kind of like a leveling up.
Yeah, exactly. He called this his vision of a universal republic of nations.
A universal republic.
Yeah, it was his idea of like an ideal world order where everybody's on the same page.
That's a pretty bold prediction, especially considering he was writing at a time of some serious national rivalries.
List was a bit of an idealist,
Yeah.
but he also saw this universal republic as the logical endpoint of his national system.
So nations would be less likely to fight if they were all economically secure.
Exactly. More inclined to cooperate.
So national development as a path to global peace.
That was his hope anyway.
I like it. But let's get back to his critique of those classical economists he kept calling the school. What else did he disagree with them about?
List thought they were too obsessed with material wealth.
Money, money, money.
Yeah, and they ignored other important things like education, innovation, even a strong moral compass.
So he's saying don't just chase the cash, build a society that values knowledge and character.
Exactly. He saw those things as essential for long-term success and national greatness.
So a nation could be rich but still be weak if it lacked those other qualities.
Exactly, like a house built on sand.
But wasn't he worried that this emphasis on national interest could lead to, well, nationalism? You know, the kind that can turn ugly.
He definitely saw that danger. He argued that national sentiment could be a good thing, a driving force for progress and innovation.
If it's channeled in the right direction.
Exactly. But it could easily be twisted into something negative, leading to hostility and conflict.
A double-edged sword.
For sure. So he thought education was key.
Okay.
He said citizens needed to learn not just about their own nation, but also about respecting other cultures.
So don't just love your country, learn about the world, and appreciate other cultures.
You got it. List believed that a truly strong and prosperous nation would be one that embraces both its own unique identity and its place in the wider world.
That's a message that feels really relevant today with all the talk about globalization and the rise of nationalism.
Absolutely. List was grappling with these issues way back in the 19th century.
So did List really believe that his vision of a universal republic was actually possible? Wasn't that a bit naive?
It's a great question, and it's one that he struggled with himself.
Yeah.
He was a realist. He knew that nations would always look out for their own interests, and that sometimes conflict was unavoidable.
It's the nature of the beast.
Right. But he also believed that human progress was possible.
So not giving up on humanity just yet.
He had hope. He thought nations could learn to cooperate and that peace and prosperity were achievable goals.
A realist, but with an optimistic streak.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe him.
So a healthy dose of realism, but not without hope. I like that.
It's a tricky balance, but List seemed to genuinely believe it was possible.
Okay.
He saw his national system as a stepping stone to that better future.
So a way for nations to develop their own strengths, but also recognize that they're part of something bigger.
Exactly.
He's giving us a lot to think about.
He is.
We've covered a lot of ground, from England's sneaky trade tactics to the surprising boosts that factories can give to farmers.
It's all connected.
But what's the big takeaway here? If List could sit down with us today, what would he want us to remember?
I think he'd want us to understand that Economics isn't this cold abstract science.
Detached from reality.
Yeah, it's about people, about nations, about the choices we make that shape our future.
He was all about the real world.
Exactly. And I think he'd also tell us to brush up on our history.
Yeah, he was a big believer in learning from the past.
He saw history as this giant laboratory full of economic experiments.
Full of successes and failures.
Exactly. He'd urge us to look beyond the headlines and the sound bites to really understand what's going on in the world.
So don't just read the tweets, read the books.
Especially his book.
Maybe just his book.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, List's work offers a really powerful antidote to these simplistic stories we often hear about economics.
You think so?
Yeah, he reminds us that there are no easy answers, no magic formulas. It's about making smart choices, investing in our future, and understanding that we're all connected.
It's about understanding the complexities.
And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
I agree.
List's ideas, they might be almost 200 years old, but they're still relevant today.
They really are.
Because they force us to ask these tough questions about how we build a more just and prosperous world.
He's not giving us all the answers, but he's giving us the right questions to ask.
So we've seen that List wasn't a big fan of just sticking to some rigid economic theory.
Nope.
He was all about looking at what actually worked in the real world.
Results mattered to him?
But how did he think all of this would actually play out on the global stage?
Yeah.
Did he think every country should just focus on itself and forget about working with others?
He was actually a big believer in international cooperation.
He was.
But he thought it had to be built on a solid foundation.
Okay, I like where this is going.
He said real cooperation could only happen when countries were on a more equal footing, you know.
Not when one was taking advantage of the other.
Exactly. It's like you can't show up to a potluck empty-handed.
Right, you got to bring something to the table.
Exactly. He said once nations had developed those productive powers we talked about, then they could engage in trade and diplomacy from a position of strength, not weakness.
So that brings us back to his idea of a universal republic.
Right.
It sounds pretty utopian.
It does.
Did you actually believe that nations could put aside their differences and create this harmonious global order?
He really did.
Oh.
But it wasn't just wishful thinking. He saw this universal republic as the natural result of his national system.
Okay.
He argued that as nations become more economically secure and self-sufficient, they'd be less likely to fight and more likely to cooperate for mutual benefit.
So kind of like, take care of your own backyard first, then we can all be good neighbors.
Exactly. List believed that strong, independent nations were the building blocks for a peaceful and prosperous world.
So it's not about countries isolating themselves.
No.
It's about creating a world where nations can cooperate as equals.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And he believed this kind of cooperation would lead to a fairer global system where everyone benefits.
It's a powerful vision, especially today when the world is so interconnected.
Definitely.
But let's be real, there's still a lot of conflict and inequality out there.
That's true.
Do List's ideas really hold up in the 21st century?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is?
And there's no simple answer. The world has changed so much since List's time.
In so many ways.
We have these global supply chains, multinational corporations, instant communication across continents. It's a whole new ballgame.
So how do we apply his ideas to this new reality? Where do we even begin?
I think List would tell us to start by looking at the big picture. He'd say, remember that economic policies, they have consequences.
For everyone.
Not just for individual nations, but for the whole world. He'd want us to think about the long-term impact of our choices, not just the quick wins.
So it's not just about profits or GDP growth.
He'd say that's a very limited view. List would push us to consider the social and environmental costs of economic activity, how wealth is distributed and the impact on future generations.
He was thinking way ahead of...
He'd say, true prosperity isn't just about money, it's about creating a world where everyone has a chance to thrive.
He'd also tell us to keep an eye on the power dynamics, wouldn't he?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
He was always wary of those who benefited from an uneven playing field.
Yeah, he'd be all over that.
He'd want us to scrutinize trade deals, to watch out for exploitation, and to fight for policies that are fair and just.
He'd want everyone to benefit from globalization.
Not just a select few.
So it's about using our economic power responsibly.
As individuals and as nations.
I think that's a key part of List's message.
It is. He challenged us to think beyond ourselves and consider the well-being of others. He believed that a truly successful society was one that looked after everyone and worked to build a fairer world.
That's a message that's both challenging and inspiring.
It is.
It's a reminder that we all have a part to play in shaping the future and that our choices really do matter.
Every decision counts. List's ideas might be old, but they can still spark important conversations and inspire action. They remind us that economics is about people, about values, and about the kind of world we want to live in.
So you've gotten a taste of List's critique of those classical economists and his vision for how nations can develop and thrive.
We just scratched the surface here.
He challenged us to think beyond just accumulating wealth and consider all those other productive powers of a nation.
Like education and innovation.
What would List say about the economic problems nations face in the 21st century?
That's a good question.
Are his ideas still relevant in our globalized world?
It's something to think about as you continue your own deep dive into the world of political economy.
That's right. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Friedrich List and his national system.